We're talking about life in our anxious world. On our last video, we learned that God designed us to be part of groups and families, to build a circle of care we can ask to be with us when we experience both good times and bad. But even with people at our side, sometimes life can hand us circumstances that are totally overwhelming, even hopeless. Today, we're going to read a tale of two hopeless situations found in the book of Luke, chapter 8. Check this out. But when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they had been waiting for him. A man named Jairus, who was a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet. He pleaded with Jesus to come to his house because his only daughter, a 12-year-old, was dying. As Jesus moved forward, he faced smothering crowds. A woman was there who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had spent her entire livelihood on doctors, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the hem of his clothes, and at once her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When everyone denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds are surrounding you and pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." When the woman saw that she couldn't escape notice, she came trembling and fell before Jesus. In front of everyone, she explained why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. "Daughter, your faith has healed you," Jesus said. "Go in peace." While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the synagogue leader's house saying to Jairus, "Your daughter has died. Don't bother the teacher any longer." When Jesus heard this, he responded, "Don't be afraid. Just keep trusting and she will be healed." When he came to the house, he didn't allow anyone to enter with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. They were all crying and mourning for her, but Jesus said, "Don't cry. She isn't dead. She's only sleeping." But they laughed at him because they knew she was dead. Taking her hand, Jesus called out, "Child, get up." Her life returned and she got up at once. He directed them to give her something to eat. Her parents were beside themselves with joy, but he ordered them to tell no one what had happened. Now in Luke 8, we find two people in hopeless situation. The woman's been sick for 12 years. The girl has just died. Feels pretty extreme, right? Now the woman is completely alone, surrounded by a crowd of strangers. We never even learn her name. The girl has family all around her and is clearly loved, but both are disconnected from other people by something they can't control, their health. But Jesus is on his way somewhere else. The crowds want to get where it's going, but Jesus stops in his tracks for both the woman and the girl. Wherever he's going, it's not as important as the people in front of him. He's not too busy to stop and notice the woman no one else seemed to have time for. He doesn't even overlook the girl everyone has given up for dead. Of the many things that we can observe in this passage of scripture, here's an important one to recognize. No matter how old a person is, no matter how hopeless things seem, no matter what everyone else thinks, when we're hurting, we're Jesus' top priority. Now, the woman had been suffering for a long time. As long as the girl has been alive, actually, there's no mention of her family or friends. In this story, we're not even given a name or place she's from. She's completely anonymous. Now, maybe her bleeding condition caused her to be avoided by Jewish society because of purity rules about not touching people who were bleeding. Or maybe she was self-conscious and pushed people away. Either way, the woman had to make the tough choice to step out of her silent struggle, no matter how hopeless she felt, and go for help. She's physically healed the instant she touches Jesus' robe, but he clearly isn't content for the woman just to walk away alone. Physical healing isn't going to solve all of her problems. It's when the woman connects and talks with Jesus that she experiences peace. Well, when the woman saw that she couldn't escape notice, she came trembling and fell before Jesus. And in front of everyone, she explained why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And Jesus looked at her and said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Now the little girl in this story, however, has a family, a home, and servants. We even know her father's name and know he's an important person in the town. Now, this girl is valued in society, yet there are some similarities between the way people react each time Jesus stops. In verse 45, we read, "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When everyone denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds are surrounding you and pressing in on you." Verse 49 says, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the synagogue leader's house saying to Jairus, "Your daughter has died. Don't bother the teacher any longer." Often the world around us and even our family and friends can miss their cue to stop and pay attention to us. We can all get distracted by our own busyness or by what the world or our culture says is important and not see how someone near us is feeling. In both the woman's story and the girl's story, Jesus has to remind even his closest followers that people are the most important priority. Now, both the sick woman and the dead girl's father needed to leave their homes and go for help. The same is true for us. Sometimes we have to stop in our own tracks and reach out for help. When we experience the same anxiety over and over again, or if we try to ignore it instead of listening to it, we eventually begin to lose hope. Ultimately, unhealthy anxiety that goes unaddressed leads to depression. And when we're depressed, most of us want to be alone and isolate ourselves. It becomes a cycle that we can't break on our own. But think about it. What would happen if instead of keeping things to ourselves in those moments when we feel hopeless, we reached out instead? Even though our feelings may make us feel vulnerable and want to be alone, it's really important that we push ourselves out the door and reach out for help, just like the sick woman and the girl's father in the story. Now check out these 3 important action steps. The first one of them is breathe. Sounds simple. You can use that prayer exercise I gave you back in the first video of this series to help ground you and look beyond the moment. Sometimes settling our body and mind is really difficult, especially when we have a lot going on. One technique is to focus on our breathing. When we breathe slowly and deeply, we let our body and souls know that it is okay to relax and rest in God's presence. It sounds simple, and we all know how to breathe, at least I hope so. But have you ever noticed that when you have a strong feeling like anxiety, your heart starts to beat faster? Your heart is just trying to do its job. Well, when you start to breathe more deeply, your heart gets more oxygen and doesn't have to work as hard. Then this amazing thing happens where your heart slows down and lets your brain know that you aren't in danger anymore. It's a really simple but powerful way to trick your body and brain to shift gears into relaxation mode. It can be a bit strange at first, but learning how to breathe with your belly instead of with your chest can also be very helpful. All you have to do is slowly take 3 seconds to breathe in through your nose, making sure to fill your belly with air. And then take 3 seconds to slowly breathe out through your mouth. As you continue to breathe deep and slow, you can begin to take a moment to simply notice God's presence with each breath that you take. And while breathing might seem kind of obvious, there's actually science behind the power of stopping to take a few breaths like this. It can make the difference between feeling completely overwhelmed or being able to cope with the moment. Now, the second thing is remember that you don't ever have to handle feelings of anxiety, sadness, or depression on your own. You have a circle of support, family members, parents, medical professionals, pastors, a church body who are ready to listen and help. And the third, if you ever feel like harming or killing yourself, pick up the phone and reach out for help. And we learned in our first video, anxiety and depression aren't permanent. There are health services, spiritual practices, and a community of people that can work together to help them feel better. Suicide is currently the second leading cause of death among young people ages 10 to 24. And it's estimated that 2 out of every 3 young people who experience suicidal thoughts don't ever get help. If you ever feel like harming or killing yourself, call the hotline number on the screen or call 911 right away. As sometimes we're concerned not just for ourselves, but for a friend. If you're ever worried that a friend might hurt themselves, it's time to reach out for help. Don't try to carry that burden on your own. You can call that same hotline number or 911. Now remember that having inner struggles doesn't mean we lack faith. It means we're human. We can grow in faith, even in the midst of our struggles. And we do 3 things. We've talked about it before. We look up, we look inside, and we look around. When we look up, we pause in the midst of our anxious thoughts to look up and seek God's encouragement through the Bible and by talking with others who are also walking in faith. When we look inside and we reflect on where God is at work inside us. When we look around, we take a good look at our own anxious world to determine when and how to ask for help so that we can make positive changes. Sometimes our anxiety can be too much for one person to handle on their own. God designed us to be part of groups and families who care, and at times to expand our circle to professional helpers. Reaching out to God and sharing honestly with others can help us from facing anxiety alone. This week, I want to challenge you to have a conversation with your parent or a trusted adult at home. Now, here's why this is really important. You might be feeling fine now, but you're going to have days when you feel more anxious, sad, or unsure of yourself. That's normal. If it ever moves beyond normal and starts to feel more serious or out of control, it helps to know ahead of time who you can go to and what you can do to get help. Now, studies have shown that among young people who have died by suicide, only half of their families were aware that they were having suicidal thoughts. We need to get comfortable talking with our families about how we feel. Sit down with a parent when you go home and talk about who's in your circle. Discuss who needs to be in your circle so that you don't have to face your inner struggles alone. And most important, talk about how you both will work together if you ever feel like you're dealing with more than you can handle. Thanks for watching with us again. And even if you don't believe it, Jesus loves you, and there are people out there that care about you.